I'm Emily, 32, the youngest in my family and a full-time nurse. All I hoped for was a seat at the table just one Christmas where I belonged, but I was still the outsider even in my own parents' home. They handed out gifts with names. Mine was missing. So I quietly stood, walked to the kitchen, then something shifted. It was snowing when I pulled into the driveway. The kind of snow that softens the world, makes everything quieter than it already is. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of my childhood home, where silhouettes moved familiar ones, but not for me. The sound of laughter slipped through the cracks of the cold air. Inside, they were already gathered around the fire, around the table, around each other. I glanced down at the small gift bag in the passenger seat. Silver ribbon, neat card, no name. I left it that way on purpose. I stepped out of the car, careful not to let the snow crunch too loud beneath my boots. The front door was slightly ajar, probably left open in the rush of hugs and coat shedding. I didn't knock. No one expected me. As I walked in, warmth hit me along with the scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine. The living room was full. Vanessa was front and center, of course. Her voice rose above the rest, telling some story about work, something impressive, no doubt. Mom sat beside her, nodding like a proud campaign manager. I hovered in the doorway, invisible. Vanessa glanced at me. Just a flick of her eyes, then back to the story. No pause, no smile, not even a hi. I waited a beat. No one looked my way. I found the nearest chair off to the side, partly tucked behind the bookshelf, and sat quietly. On the coffee table was a plate of gingerbread cookies, half eaten. The good ones from the bakery near my apartment. I had brought them last year. They were a hit. But this year, Vanessa had made cookies too. Hers were in the center of the table, artfully plated. Mine weren't on the spread. I noticed the seating arrangements had shifted. Last Christmas, I'd sat next to Mom. This year, that spot was occupied by Vanessa's husband, Tyler, who offered wine refills like he owned the place. My seat was unassigned. I tried to smile. I did. I asked how everyone was doing. A few polite nods, murmured responses, but mostly Vanessa kept talking, and then the regional director said, "We should just promote Vanessa now." She laughed. Everyone else did too. I reached for a cookie and withdrew my hand. They weren't mine. Mom turned to me briefly. "Emily, did you get the email I forwarded about the holiday volunteering event?" Her voice was thin, like it had to stretch across a chasm. "I did," I said. "Thanks. That's good." She nodded. Then she turned to Vanessa again. "Vanessa already signed up. She'll be helping lead the community outreach." "Isn't that wonderful, wonderful," I echoed. But no one heard me. I looked around the room. So full, but not one place to land. Suddenly, Tyler called out, "We should start dinner." He clapped his hands. "Let's get the table ready." They moved as a unit. Napkins unfolded, candles lit. I stood to help, but my mother gently shook her head. "You can relax, sweetie. We've got it." "Sweetie," said like a pat on the head. I sat back down. My chair hadn't been moved. Vanessa laid out place cards on the long dining table, names written in calligraphy. Tyler, Mom, Dad, Vanessa. Even their dog had one tucked next to a little bowl of turkey bites. I looked for mine. There wasn't one. No one noticed as I stood again. I walked over, slowly scanning both sides of the table. My name, Emily, was missing. "Is there an extra spot?" I asked gently. Vanessa looked at me, blinking. "Oh. We didn't know if you'd make it, so..." Mom chimed in, adjusting a napkin. "We thought you'd be on call at the hospital. I told you I got the night off." "Oh, right." She smiled tight. "Well, there's a folding chair in the garage. We can bring it in if you want." I paused. "It's fine." They all returned to chatting, shifting dishes, lighting candles. No one offered to move over. No one made room. I turned toward the hall, pretending to get my coat. No one stopped me. As I stepped away, I caught the reflection of the table in the hallway mirror. Every chair filled, laughter bouncing off the walls, and me blurred in the reflection, standing at the edge. I didn't cry. I just stood still. Then I walked back to the car. The gift bag was still on the seat. I pulled out the card, stared at the blank front. Inside, I'd written nothing. I placed it on their doorstep, tucked neatly under the wreath. I got in the car and drove off, headlights fading into the snow. The roads were still clear and the snow hadn't piled up yet. As I drove, the silence inside the car felt louder than the holiday music playing faintly through the radio. I turned it off. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like a stranger in my own family, but tonight had a sharpness to it. Not because of what was said, very little was, but because of how seamless my absence felt to them, like they'd already rehearsed the version of Christmas that didn't include me. I thought about last year. I had arrived early to help set the table, made cranberry compote from scratch, and brought a homemade pecan pie. Vanessa had shown up just before dinner, holding a store-bought cake. Mom had praised her for always knowing just what we need. I remembered the sting then. It didn't compare to tonight. At a red light, I checked my phone. A group text from work buzzed in ER team Merry Christmas to the best night crew. Hope you're surviving the shift. I didn't respond. I wasn't on shift tonight. I had made sure of that weeks in advance. Vanessa had said once in front of the whole family, Emily likes working holidays. It's her thing. Like it was a choice. Like it wasn't the only way I knew how to escape the ache of being unwanted at home. I pulled into the parking lot of the only open diner I could think of. It was nearly empty, just two older men in a booth and a waitress humming softly behind the counter. I took a seat by the window. She came over, smiled warmly. Christmas dinner for one, I smiled back just barely. That's right. She poured me coffee without asking. You want the roast turkey special? Sure. As she walked away, I stared out at the snow beginning to settle on the sidewalk. The lights from the diner reflected faintly on the glass. For the first time that evening, I felt still. I didn't cry, I didn't stew. I just let the quiet in. Across the diner, one of the older men raised his cup toward me like a silent toast. I nodded, returned it. No words exchanged. When the food came, I ate slowly. I watched the door, half expecting anyone to walk in. But no one did. My phone buzzed again. A message from Mom. Mom, hope you're okay. We didn't mean for things to be awkward. I stared at it. No apology. Just a vague nod to discomfort, as if I had imagined it. I didn't reply. Then another buzz, this time from Vanessa. Vanessa. You could have just said you weren't coming. Mom felt bad you left. There it was. I read it twice, then turned off my phone. I stayed in that booth for over an hour. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. She didn't pry. She didn't push. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me all day. Before leaving, I scribbled a thank you on the check and left a tip, twice the bill. As I stepped back out into the cold, I noticed the snow had started to fall heavier. Back in the car, I sat for a moment breathing in the foggy warmth before starting the engine, and then I realized something. I hadn't been angry. Not really, just absent. Not from the house. From their story. I had been edited out like I was never meant to belong. That realization didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It clarified things. I pulled back into my apartment complex and parked. The street was empty, the world quiet again. As I stepped inside my place, everything was just as I left it. Dim lights, one string of ornaments on a small artificial tree, a half-wrapped gift on the counter. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let the silence stretch. Somewhere between the second sip and the hum of the radiator, I began to write a note. Not to them. To myself. I wrote down everything I remembered from that night, where they sat, what they said, what they didn't. How my name hadn't been on the table. I wasn't going to send it. It wasn't for them. It was a record. So that when I questioned myself later, wondering if maybe I'd been too sensitive, too quiet, too distant, I'd have it in writing. They called me a stranger without saying the word. So I left no name behind. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because the air felt lighter, like something had settled overnight. I wrapped myself in a blanket and padded into the kitchen to make coffee. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater kicking on. I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. It didn't surprise me. As I sipped my coffee, I looked at the envelope sitting on the counter, the one I had planned to bring to dinner. It held a handwritten card and 2 gift cards, one for Mom, one for Vanessa. I'd picked them out weeks ago. I remembered thinking how proud I was for choosing thoughtful gifts, even though part of me knew they wouldn't notice. I opened the envelope, pulled out the card, and looked at what I'd written: Merry Christmas. Thank you for everything this year. Love, Emily. It looked small now, almost naive. I tore the card in half, then again, and again. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt like letting go. Instead of tossing the pieces, I folded them neatly, placed them back into the envelope, sealed it, and wrote nothing on the outside. No name, no return address, just the envelope, blank and quiet. Later that day, I stopped by their house while they were out. I'd done it before, fed the cat when they traveled, dropped off food when Mom had the flu. The house still smelled like cinnamon and pine. I left the envelope on the hallway table right next to the stack of opened presents and torn wrapping paper. I didn't stay. I didn't look around. I locked the door behind me and walked away. In that moment, I didn't feel like a daughter or a sister. I felt like someone who had chosen to remove herself from a place she was never really invited into, and there was peace in that. Later at home, I baked the pie I never got to bring. Pecan again, but this time for me. As it cooled, I took out a small plate, sliced a piece, and sat by the window. Outside, the neighborhood was still dotted with twinkling lights and half-buried reindeer figures on lawns. Christmas wasn't over yet for everyone, but for me, something had ended quietly and entirely, and as I took the first bite, I felt it. Not bitterness, not sadness, just space. Space to begin again on my own terms. They had called me a stranger, so I left nothing behind to remind them otherwise. The week before Christmas always had a certain rhythm to it. Lights on houses blinked in sync with the same old carols playing from passing cars. Grocery stores buzzed with last-minute shoppers stocking up on everything from pie crusts to party napkins, but for me it felt like I was watching it all unfold from behind a pane of glass. Vanessa had texted a few days before. Just a line. Dinner's at 5. Casual. Bring wine. No, we'd love to see you. No, can't wait. Just a timestamp and an obligation. I'd almost responded with a thumbs-up emoji, but deleted it. I sent thanks. See you then instead. Neutral. Unassuming. Like me. At work, people buzzed about their holiday plans, their faces lighting up as they spoke about family warmth, shared traditions. I smiled and nodded, tossing out a, "That sounds lovely" here and there, careful not to let my silence give me away. I'd long learned how to mask the ache of not belonging. 2 days before Christmas, I ran into Vanessa at the pharmacy. She was picking up a prescription for Mom. She didn't see me at first, or maybe she did and pretended not to, but I walked up anyway. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "Oh, Emily." Her voice rose slightly, like she was forcing the surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." We stood in the aisle between cold medicine and candy canes. "How's Mom doing?" I asked. "She's fine. You know how she is around the holidays. Everything has to be perfect." Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded. "I remember." There was a beat of silence. Then she added, "Just don't bring anything too weird this year, okay? You know how Mom is about presentation. It was like being pinched but without a mark left behind." "I wasn't planning to," I replied calmly. "Good." Oh, and she paused, then waved it off. "Never mind. I'm sure you know." I didn't ask her to finish the sentence. I knew. I always knew. When I got home, I unpacked the ingredients I'd bought for the pecan pie, Mom's favorite. I'd made it every Christmas since college, even the years I hadn't been invited. I told myself it was tradition. I told myself it mattered. The night before dinner, I called Mom. She picked up on the third ring. "Hi, it's me," I said. "Oh, Emily. Hi." Her voice was clipped, distracted. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, just wanted to confirm I should come around 5. Vanessa said it was casual." There was a pause. "Yes, 5 is fine. But Vanessa is bringing a new appetizer, so maybe don't bring the pie this year. We might not have space." I blinked. "I already bought everything." "Well, maybe save it for your coworkers. I'm sure they'd enjoy it." She said it with the same tone one uses when suggesting a donation. I didn't argue. "All right," I said. "See you tomorrow." When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long moment. The groceries sat untouched on the counter. The oven hadn't even been preheated. I looked at the bag of pecans and thought of all the times I'd shelled them by hand just to make it feel more personal. That night I didn't bake. Instead, I packed the ingredients into the back of the pantry behind canned soup and dusty cookbooks, out of sight like so many other things I'd learned to hide. Christmas Day came with the dull gray of overcast skies, the kind that made the string lights on houses look tired. I dressed carefully, a soft red sweater, dark jeans, and a pair of flats Mom had once complimented. Subtle, not flashy. Neutral tones. Invisible daughter chic. When I arrived at the house, the driveway was already full. I parked a block away and walked, the cold biting at my fingertips. Inside, warmth and laughter spilled out like a movie scene. Vanessa opened the door with one hand and held a flute of champagne in the other. "You made it," she said, stepping aside. "Coat rack's full, just toss yours on the bed." "Thanks," I murmured, stepping in. The house smelled of rosemary and roasted meat. Music played low, some jazzy version of Silent Night. I stood at the edge of the living room for a beat before anyone noticed me. "Oh, Emily," Mom said, approaching with a napkin in hand. "You're here." She leaned in for a one-arm hug. "You look festive." "Thanks," I replied, unsure if it was a compliment or an observation. "You didn't bring anything, right?" "No." "Good. We're tight on table space this year." I nodded. Vanessa's husband gave me a quick wave from across the room, already mid-story with someone from his law firm. A few neighbors I barely knew offered polite smiles. No one asked how I'd been. I found an empty seat in the corner of the living room, half tucked behind the tree. It was one of those chairs that seemed placed for decoration, not use. I didn't mind. From my angle, I could see the dining room table, long, polished, perfectly set. Name cards adorned each plate. I watched as guests moved around, laughing, refilling drinks, stealing bites from each other's plates. But there was no name card for me. Not on the table. Not anywhere. Dinner was called shortly after. Vanessa clinked her glass with a polished knuckle and announced, "Let's gather, everyone. Food's getting cold." Her voice was bright, rehearsed, the kind that reached the far corners of the room and demanded movement. People shuffled toward the table like actors hitting their marks. Laughter continued as coats were hung, drinks refilled, and seats claimed. I lingered. There were 12 chairs, 13 people. I stood there quiet, unmoving. Mom looked up from adjusting a serving spoon and gestured toward the kitchen. "There's a folding chair by the pantry," she said casually, not meeting my eyes. "Could you bring it in?" I walked to the pantry, picked up the metal chair with its worn cushion, and brought it back. I tried to unfold it quietly, but it gave a soft screech that turned a few heads. I placed it at the end of the table, just past the last name card where no plate had been set. Vanessa noticed. "Oh, we forgot Emily's setting," she said, as if remembering a background prop. She leaned over, pulled an extra plate from the hutch, and set it down without silverware or a napkin ring. "There we go," she smiled. "All set now." I thanked her gently and took my seat. Dinner began. Turkey was carved, glasses clinked. Vanessa gave a toast, something about family gratitude and new beginnings. I listened quietly. No one asked me to speak. As dishes were passed, I noticed a small pile of gifts beneath the tree. Mom always insisted presents be opened after dinner so we don't rush the meal, but the pile looked smaller than I remembered from years past. Vanessa's kids, both teenagers now, were joking with each other between bites. Her husband made a quip about avoiding politics at the table, drawing scattered laughs. It was normal, polished, perfect. I excused myself briefly to use the bathroom. Not because I needed to, but because I needed a moment. In the hallway mirror, I looked at my reflection, lipstick still intact, eyes a little tired. I adjusted my sweater collar and smoothed the hem. When I returned, dessert had been served, pumpkin pie with whipped cream and a bowl of mixed nuts in the center, pecans among them. "Try some," Mom said, gesturing to the pie. Vanessa baked it. I smiled, took a bite. It was dry. No one noticed. After dessert, the group migrated to the living room. The fire crackled gently. Vanessa's husband opened the first present and held it up for show, a wool scarf. Applause, chuckles. Then one by one, the rest of the gifts were passed out. Each had a name tag. To Vanessa, from Mom to Mom. From Vanessa to Dad, from all of us, to Ethan, from Aunt Vanessa. I watched the pile shrink. I waited. No one handed me anything. Vanessa looked up at one point, almost surprised to still see me there. "Oh, Emily," she said. "I think yours might be in the back room." "Mom?" Mom blinked. I don't remember." "Oh, maybe we left it with the coats." I stood up. "It's okay," I said, forcing a soft smile. "I didn't bring any gifts this year either. Thought I'd keep it simple." Vanessa gave a half laugh. "Minimalist Christmas. Love that." People chuckled again, not unkindly, just without thinking. I sat back down. There was a moment, just a beat, where the room quieted, and I felt their eyes shift away like a breeze had passed through. Vanessa's daughter leaned toward her mother, whispering something. They both smiled. Later, as guests began saying their goodbyes, I stood by the door helping collect coats, saying polite thank yous and happy holidays like punctuation marks. No one asked me to stay longer. No one offered leftovers. On my way out, I paused by the tree. A single red envelope lay tucked between two branches, plain, unmarked. I picked it up, turned it over. Nothing. Vanessa saw and waved it off. "Oh, I think that's just a blank card Mom had left out for emergencies. You can toss it." I nodded, but I didn't toss it. I slipped it into my coat pocket. Outside, the cold hit harder than before. The walk to my car was longer than I remembered. I didn't look back at the house. Inside my coat, the envelope felt heavier than paper. When I got home, I placed it on my kitchen counter and stared at it. Blank, like I didn't exist at all. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the blinds in my apartment. The silence felt louder than usual. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm mug of coffee, the red envelope lying untouched beside it. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. Its emptiness felt deliberate. That afternoon, I went for a walk around the lake. I passed bundled-up families, kids tugging at sleds, dogs prancing through snowbanks. The world moved full and bright, and I felt like a smudge in its margins. Back home, I began sorting through a small box of holiday cards I'd planned to send all unsent. Some had stamps already. Most had my handwriting. I paused at one, a card meant for Mom and Dad, simple gold lettering to the ones who raised me. I traced the words with my finger, then quietly ripped it in half. I didn't cry. That evening, Vanessa texted, just a casual message. "Hey, hope you got home okay last night. Crazy how fast the holidays fly by. Love you." She even added a snowflake emoji. I stared at it. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to explain. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. I worked. I cooked for myself. I read old journals, pages full of forgotten fragments. One entry stood out, scribbled in shaky handwriting from years ago. "You don't need a chair at their table to know your worth." I remembered writing that. I just hadn't believed it back then. On New Year's Eve, while most people were prepping for countdowns and champagne, I was at the post office. I walked in with a stack of cards, not the ones from before. These were new, blank, no glitter, no scripted fonts. Just one line inside, "Thank you for seeing me." Each card had a name: co-workers, my landlord, the woman at the bakery who always remembered my order, but one envelope had no name. Just a simple message written by hand to the one who forgot I was still here. I didn't sign it. I left it in my mailbox unstamped. I knew Mom would visit after the new year. She always picked up my mail when she stopped by just to check in. On the back of the envelope, I wrote one final line: "Some names don't belong on cards anymore." Then I closed the mailbox. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. It was mid-January when the call came. Vanessa's voice was tight, almost performative in its concern. "Mom wants to host a late New Year's dinner," she said. "You know, just to make up for the whole Christmas mix-up." I said nothing. "She wants you there," she added quickly. "And She asked if you could bring the wine. I almost laughed, not at the request, but at how routine it sounded, as if nothing had happened, as if my daughter hadn't been turned away like a stranger, as if I hadn't sat alone on Christmas night wondering if I was invisible. But I agreed, not out of forgiveness, but because I wanted to see how silence would sit at their table this time. The dinner was set for a Sunday evening. I arrived 10 minutes early out of habit. The house looked the same wreath on the door, same flickering porch light. But something in me had shifted. I walked up the steps slower, my heels steady on the wood. When I entered, Mom gave a quick hug, already turning toward the kitchen before I could take off my coat. "Vanessa's bringing dessert," she called over her shoulder. "She found that lemon tart you both used to like, that we both used to like. Not that I ever remembered being asked." The table was set for 5: Mom, Dad, Vanessa, her husband, and me. A place card sat at each setting, handwritten in Vanessa's elegant cursive. I glanced at mine. It said Emily like always, but something about it felt staged, like they were trying too hard to erase what couldn't be undone. We sat. The usual pleasantries, past work traffic, some new neighbor who installed a hideous fountain. I nodded where expected, chewed politely. When Mom brought out the food, I noticed the silver serving spoons, the ones that used to belong to Grandma, passed down with ceremony, stored away like relics. "You brought those out," I said quietly. Mom didn't look up. "Vanessa thought it would make tonight feel more special." Of course she did. We ate. Or rather, they ate. I moved food around my plate, waiting. It happened just before dessert. Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of envelopes, New Year's cards, she explained. Something thoughtful she'd started doing a few years ago. "I made one for each of you," she said, beaming. "Just something little. A quote, a photo, a memory. You know, to celebrate the year ahead." She passed them out, one for Mom, one for Dad, one for her husband. Then she paused, looked at me. Oh, she blinked. "I must have left yours at home." The room froze. No one said a word. I felt the weight of their glances, awkward and darting, as if trying to pretend it hadn't happened, as if the silence could smooth over the absence. I set down my fork, smiled. Then, without a word, I reached into my bag, pulled out 5 cards nearly identical in size and shape to Vanessa's. I slid one to each person. They opened them slowly, uncertain. Inside each card read the same, "Thank you for reminding me where I stand." No signature, no photo, no quote, just truth. And one more card remained in my hand, a 6th addressed only with one word, "stranger." I left it on Vanessa's plate right beside the uneaten slice of lemon tart. Then I nodded once to the room and walked out, heels tapping softly against hardwood, the only sound anyone dared make. I didn't look back when I walked out, not even when I heard Mom's chair scrape slightly or the muffled sound of someone whispering my name. The night air hit me like clarity, crisp, still honest. I slid into my car, placed my hands on the steering wheel, and exhaled, letting the quiet stretch around me like a blanket I hadn't known I needed. No one followed me, and that was louder than any apology could have been. I drove home slowly, passing houses wrapped in leftover twinkle lights, their windows glowing with lives I wasn't part of. Somewhere between the 3rd red light and the turn into my street, a single tear rolled down my cheek. Not from sadness, not anymore, but from release. Inside my apartment, the air was warm. The faint scent of the pine candle I'd forgotten to blow out still lingered. I placed the empty wine bottle I'd brought back from dinner on the counter, then walked to the small table by the window where a stack of envelopes waited. Cards I'd written weeks ago. Each one simple, unsigned. Each one a line drawn not in anger, but in understanding. I sat and opened my laptop. On the screen, an email from a publishing contact blinked unread. A friend had forwarded my blog months ago, the one I'd started writing anonymously after Christmas. Quiet stories, observations, moments too small to say aloud at dinner tables. But people had read them, and someone had listened. The email subject read, "Let's talk next steps." I didn't smile, but something inside me settled. 2 weeks passed before anyone reached out. It was Vanessa. Her text was short. I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I stared at it. not because it hurt, but because it felt hollow, as if the damage was the result of clumsy packaging, not deliberate dismissal. I didn't reply. That weekend I received a letter in the mail, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Mom's, inside a folded piece of stationery with just one sentence, "We all make mistakes." I placed it back into the envelope, set it inside a drawer I rarely opened, and I didn't make space for it on my shelf. Spring came early that year. One afternoon, as I walked home from the corner cafe, I passed the community board near the library. A flyer caught my eye: local readings every Thursday, open mic, essays welcome. I didn't plan to sign up, but that Thursday I went. The room was small, filled with mismatched chairs and the scent of old books. A woman in her 60s read a poem about her mother's hands. A teenager shared a story about losing her voice in a house full of shouting. Then it was my turn. I didn't read anything scathing, I didn't name names. I just told a story about a dinner, a name left off a card, and how sometimes the absence of acknowledgement echoes louder than cruelty. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped, then another. And before I knew it, the sound filled the room, soft, sincere. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough. Afterward, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her 50s, warm eyes, steady presence. "That story," she said gently, "it was mine too." Different setting, same silence. I nodded. We didn't need to say more. Sometimes being seen doesn't require a spotlight, just a mirror. And in that moment, I knew I'd stopped writing for them. I was writing for us. A month later, I received another card in the mail. This time it was from Dad. The handwriting was more rigid, controlled. Inside, just 4 words: "Hope you're doing well." No apology, no acknowledgement, just a sentence floating in a sea of white. I held the card between my fingers, feeling its weight, flimsy, forgettable. I set it beside Mom's letter in the drawer, not out of bitterness, but to keep the silence where it belonged in the past. By now, my blog had taken on a quiet life of its own. I had readers, strangers who didn't know my name but saw themselves in my stories. Comments began appearing like tiny lights in the dark. This made me feel less alone. I thought it was just me. "Thank you." I never responded directly, but each comment felt like a hand held out, and I met it in my own way. The Christmas after that, I was invited to 3 different dinners. None were with family. One was a neighbor who had read my work, another from a woman I met at the reading, and the third, a quiet, cozy invite from a small bookshop owner who liked the way I described snow. That year, I didn't bring wine. I brought cards, not signed, not fancy, just short notes folded in 2. Each one began with a sentence that had once been a turning point for me: "You deserve a seat at the table." At each dinner, I slipped the card beneath a napkin or tucked it between dessert plates. No one asked questions, but I saw their eyes soften when they opened it. The way one woman looked around the table and whispered, "I didn't know I needed to hear that." The way a man simply nodded and folded it back into his coat pocket without a word. I didn't stay too long at any of the dinners, just long enough. That spring, the local library asked if I'd consider compiling some of my essays into a small collection. Nothing fancy, just stapled pages and a soft cover. I agreed. We called it "The Card Without a Name." At the launch, only a dozen people came, but one of them was my high school English teacher, who stood in the back and waited until the room had mostly cleared. "I always knew your voice would find a home," she said. I thanked her not with a speech, but with a quiet nod. That was enough. As I packed up that night, I felt no need to send the book to my parents, not because I wanted to deny them anything, but because I'd finally learned that not everyone earns the right to witness your becoming. Months passed. Then, one Sunday morning, I walked into the grocery store and saw Vanessa. She was standing by the apples, her daughter, my niece, beside her, now a few inches taller and more guarded in her gaze. Our eyes met. Vanessa gave a small, uncertain smile. I didn't return it. Not out of cruelty, but because healing isn't a performance. It doesn't require acknowledgement from those who caused the wound. As I passed her, I heard her say quietly to her daughter, "That's Aunt Emily." It stopped me. just for a second. Not because I needed to be called that, but because it reminded me that identity is not something others grant you, it's something you reclaim. I didn't turn around. I didn't wave. I just walked on steady, whole, and entirely myself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward the life I had built, one quiet step at a time. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a closed door, a chair left empty, or a card without a name. But somewhere in the quiet that follows, a woman stands taller, not to be seen, but because she no longer needs permission to take up space. And that sometimes is the loudest reckoning of all.